Hello everyone, I'm Diccon and I'm a cartophile. In other words, I love maps. I always have and probably always will. Even in the age of Google Maps on an iPhone, there's nothing quite like opening up an old-fashioned paper map, spreading it out and letting it take you on a journey of discovery, maybe long-forgotten places or lands we know nothing about. For this passion, I blame my grandmother. She was also a map lover, but she was a terrible map reader. And I mean terrible. So purely from necessity, my love affair with maps began at a very early age because someone had to navigate the annual trip to Italy. Otherwise, we would have been in Sweden. And what I love about maps is that they do open doors for us. And actually, more than that, they open a door and push us through, letting us travel through time and space without having to move an inch. With one piece of paper, we can look into the future or discover hidden treasure. We can travel around a whole country or simply get from A to B. Best of all, maps can take us on a magical history tour. And that's what we're going to do today in Switzerland. But I want you to forget the Switzerland you hear about all the time, that boring, neutral, sterile place. This is Switzerland, full of bears and pigs and war and sex, though not all at the same time. Thank goodness. We're going to start with a map drawn by a medieval monk, and that is not the sex map. Now, it's kind of hard to see Switzerland there. I know you're thinking, what's he showing me? But this is actually the oldest map of Switzerland to show it as a single country. It was drawn in 1479 by a monk, Albrecht von Bonstetten, and you can practically hear his quill scratching on the parchment. It was hand-drawn. And with that ring of heavenly stars, it almost looks as if Switzerland is the world is Switzerland. A lot of Swiss still believe that. But when you look inside the circle, you can see some of the detail coming out. Right at the center is Mount Rigi, beside Lake Lucerne. And then around that are the names of the 8 cantons that in those days made up the Confederation. A couple are easy to see. On the right, you see Berne, obviously Bern. In the middle, you see Zug, which hasn't changed at all. And at the bottom, either by name or by nature. And at the bottom, you can see Thüringen, which may not sound familiar until you realize is the medieval name for Zurich, where we're standing today. But of course, Zurich is in the north of the country. So to our eyes, this map is upside down. But it was perfectly normal in those days in Switzerland to have maps with south at the top, like this one. It lasted up until about the end of the 16th century because they were oriented towards Rome, the center of the known world. So it may look upside down to us, but it wasn't to them. But I didn't notice that at first. What I noticed, first of all, was that this is not Switzerland in the 15th century. This is Switzerland today. That ring of gold stars on a blue background is the European Union flag, with Switzerland at its center. So this monk looked 500 years into the future and drew modern Switzerland as an island at the center of the European Union. Of course, he wasn't trying to be political, but politics and maps often come together, especially in eras when a lot of people could not read or write, and so maps were used as a political tool. And the next map is a great example of that. It's also one of my favorites, Canton Bern as a bear. And I'm sure most of you know that the bear is the symbol of the canton. This is from 1700, when Bern was the biggest and most powerful canton in the Confederation, and it wanted to show that. So it controlled the Bernese Oberland, the bear's paw. It controlled the head, Aargau, and it controlled the rump, Vaud. All of that was Bernese. And so it's making a political statement. This is a powerful bear. It's a bear with a sword, a bear with claws, a bear with teeth, not a bear to be messed with. But it's a political map. And we know politics is all about lies. And this map is no exception. In the middle of that map should be the canton and city of Fribourg. At that time, it was a member of the Swiss Confederation, and it was surrounded completely by Bern. But to show it on the map would mean this powerful bear would have a hole right in its middle. It would not be a scary bear, it would be a dead bear. That's not what the Bernese wanted, so they leave Fribourg off the map completely. It is not there at all. Fake news is nothing new. Also, along the bear's back, there are two lakes, Lake Neuchâtel, the slightly larger one, and then what we call Lake Beale, or Bielersee. The problem was, Beale was not part of Bern in those days. It wasn't even part of Switzerland. It was an independent city-state outside the border. So to call it Lake Beale would imply it belonged to Beale, whereas in fact the lake belonged to Bern. So they rechristened it Lake Nidau, named after the Bernese town of Nidau. So on this map, and pretty much only on this map, we have the alternative fact of Nidauersee. It's being economical with the truth. And you might think the Swiss never do that, but they do when it suits them. And sometimes the truth can surprise you when it's the real truth. What if I told you that the wonderful rail network that we all use here, that is part of the Swiss national identity, was a British creation? I know it's hard to believe given the state of British railways, but this is the rail network in 1873. It's a very important moment in Swiss history, though it never makes it into the history books. This is the moment when independent travel takes off and mass tourism really starts in Switzerland. This is the first Interrail map of Switzerland. It was published by Thomas Cook, who was a real person before he was a travel agent. And 10 years earlier, he had brought the first ever package tour to Switzerland. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know how much it would cost. He didn't know where they would stay. It was a little bit like flying with Ryanair 150 years ago. But he actually made a success, and within 10 years, he had set up a travel agency, was selling around the world tickets, had invented travelers' checks and rail passes, and with them, rail maps so his customers could know where they could go on his tickets. It was the moment that mass tourism from Britain took off. But there's more British elements in the rail story than that, because a few years earlier, a man called Robert Stephenson, who was son of George Stephenson, the original rocket man, he invented the Stephenson's rocket, he was invited here by the Swiss government to build, or at least design, a Swiss rail network, because at that point, Switzerland had one train line between Zurich and Baden. It was a long way behind its neighbours because the cantons could not agree where to build the lines or who should pay for them, so they just didn't build any. Nothing changes very quickly in Switzerland. So the new federal government decided we need to start or kickstart this. And so they invited Stephenson here, and he created a basic plan which served as the blueprint for the rail network we have today. It is also the reason why Swiss trains run on the left, like in Britain, not on the right, like in Germany. It is a British rail system. And it's not the only thing the British and the Swiss have in common. In a couple of years, we will both be outside the EU. And both have no answer as to what we want to do outside the EU. And 75 years ago, we were both beyond the reach of the Nazis. It's 1941. The rest of the world is rather busy. But the Swiss don't have too much to do except sit on the border and wait for an invasion that never comes. So they decide to count their pigs. And to make a map. I love this map. It is so Swiss because it takes an inherently dull subject, the national pig census, and turns it into something you can really treasure. Because there's so much detail in there. The three colours are the main breeds of pig, so you can see where they all are. Within each district, there is a circle, which is usually differently coloured. That is the minority breed in that district. And best of all, there is the Schweinedichtenkarte, the pig density map. That is on the bottom right, and it shows you where the pigs actually lived. And most of them were alongside Bodensee, Lake Constance, and why wouldn't you? It's lovely there. Now, of course, there is a very serious reason behind this map. Switzerland was isolated, was cut off, was surrounded by the Axis powers, had to survive alone. They needed to know how much food they had. So the Swiss counted not only their pigs, but chickens, goats, sheep, cows, horses, ducks, anything that could move and be eaten. And they made a map for each one. Luckily, the pig map survived, because this is so much nicer than a table of figures. It gives us a real insight into Switzerland in between the wars. Now, you have to forget all about pigs, because the next map is the sex map, and pigs and sex do not belong in the same headspace. This is mid-1970s, Stadtplan für Männer, a city map for men. And it was specifically aimed at men, both locals and tourists. It wasn't an underground thing, it was sold openly in kiosks. This is the 5th edition, so it obviously was relatively successful. And it shows you where to find sex in the city, in this case, Zurich. And the best part, I'm sure the reason it sold so well, is the icons along the right-hand side. So the lovely young lady with the long legs and the red hair, she represents the pink areas of the map, the young street prostitutes. Just next to her is the rather frumpy lady with the blue rinse, the sagging breasts, the cigarette in her mouth. As the map said, this is where prostitutes are somewhat over the hill. Although it does point out usually cheaper. Then we have icons to show strip bars, go-go shows, and also 2 men hugging to show gay meeting places. So this is the mid-70s in conservative Switzerland, but relatively liberal and progressive. But there's more, because on the back of the map, there are guide prices for whatever services you might want to order in an establishment, and it says, all tried and tested. Though we'll never know how far the researcher went in that regard, and we really don't want to know. It doesn't really get much more real than a sex map of Zurich, so sometimes maps do the opposite. They show you something that is an alternate reality. And it lets us look behind the door labeled "What if?" What if Switzerland hadn't always been neutral and peaceful? It wasn't always neutral and peaceful. Sometimes it was just like any other European country. It invaded, it conquered, it annexed territory. So what if Switzerland still had all that territory it once conquered? This would be Switzerland today. A greater Switzerland, a Schweizer Reich, if you will, with 40 cantons, not 26. You can see today's Switzerland at the center with the letter codes, but the number codes, where the borders have bled into France, Germany, Austria, and Italy, are the areas that used to be Swiss. So in the southeast, number 2, Valtellina, was controlled by Graubünden for almost 300 years, forcibly taken from them, and is now part of Italy. The southern shore of Lake Geneva was conquered by the Bernese, was Swiss for 33 years, is now part of France. Or even number 13 at the top, the city-state of Rottweil, famous for its dogs, was a Swiss protectorate for almost 200 years, but is now German. The one exception on that map is in the east, number 15. That is Vorarlberg. It was never Swiss, but it wanted to be. That's a big distinction. At the end of the First World War, Austria was being created from the remnants of the Habsburg Empire. And the people of Vorarlberg were given a choice: join the new Austria or become Swiss. There was a referendum, and they voted overwhelmingly, 82%, to join Switzerland. And why wouldn't they? It was the best choice. And the Swiss said, no thanks. Not just because they're Austrian, but also because it was a large, Catholic, German-speaking province that would be a canton. It would upset this very delicate balance, which was much more important then than now, between religion, Catholic, Protestant, and between the 4 national languages. So they were determined not to have Vorarlberg as a canton. The Allies backed them up because they were worried that the new Austria would not be a viable state without Vorarlberg, because it's so much land. And so the people were ignored. Even in the home of direct democracy, referendums are not written in stone. They can be changed. Britain, please take note. So we have seen that maps can do lots of things. They can lie to us, or they can tell us the truth. They can show us geography and history. They can show us futures or pasts that never happened. With these 6 maps, we have managed to see fake news in the 17th century and the EU in the 15th century. We've heard about British rail in the Alps and sex in the city. We've seen pigs in wartime, and we've seen a Switzerland that never existed. I hope you agree with me that through these maps, you'll never look at Switzerland the same way again. Thank you.